each different bubble of reality is true.
A galactic historian is a person that looks at all the lines of dramatic karma.
Nudge, nudge, it's the holy grail.
Improvise. Mysterious.
It's counter psychic intelligence.
Why is DNA farming of this star cluster so important?
Because we do manifest our reality. We do create our reality.
The death of a man who sang and played the guitar overshadows the news.
By the time Walter Cronkite began the nightly news on December 9th, 1980, the biggest single news story in the world was more than 18 hours old. In America, millions of people didn't find out what happened from a newscast or a special report. They learned John Lennon was dead by watching a football game.
Everyone, and we're excited about tonight because the Patriots have not been able to beat Shula and Miami here at the Orange Bowl since 1966.
That night in New York City, a local TV news producer for WABC, Alan Weiss, was in a motorcycle accident in Central Park and taken to nearby Roosevelt Hospital.
One of the EMTs said to me, "You're really lucky. If it was the weekend with all the shootings and stuff that go on, you could be in the ER for hours before anybody sees you, but it's a quiet night tonight."
The 24-yard attempt.
The Dolphins tied the game at the end of the third quarter. Cosell, Gifford, and Fran Tarkenton called the action.
Frank, you just can't come into a game the way New England has come into this. Fighting for a playoff berth, you've got to go all out and be aggressive.
In New York, Weiss noticed another patient being wheeled past him.
Two of the police officers come out, and I hear one officer say to the other one, "Can you believe it? John Lennon." I opened up my eyes and I looked up and I said, "Excuse me, officer, what did you say?"
Just before 11 that night outside the Dakota, his apartment building in New York, Lennon was shot 4 times by an obsessed fan named Mark David Chapman. Dr. Stephen Lynn was working in the emergency room at Roosevelt Hospital.
We were told that he had no vital signs, and the nurses, in fact, confirmed no blood pressure, no pulse, no breathing, no response.
I knew that there was a payphone in the waiting room. So I called the assignment desk, spoke to Neil Goldstein, the assignment editor. "Neil, I'm at Roosevelt. I think John Lennon's been shot."
At the time of the call, Lennon was still in surgery.
I literally took his heart in my right hand and massaged his heart, hoping that perhaps when we restored some blood volume, we could restore some cardiac function. But that was not to be the case. And at about 11:15 that evening, John Lennon was pronounced dead.
Outside the hospital that night, Alan Weiss described what happened next.
There was a scream, a woman's voice. I was told, I did not see who was screaming, I was told it was Yoko Ono. "Oh no, no, oh no, oh no."
She said, "No, it's not possible. You're lying. He can't be dead. He was just alive. I saw him."
Before anyone outside Roosevelt Hospital knew of Lennon's fate, Weiss confirmed with his own doctor what happened, and then reported it. In Miami, the Patriots and Dolphins were tied in the closing minutes of the fourth quarter.
Beautiful shot by Kavanaugh.
When the phone rang in the production truck.
ABC News called the truck and said, "John Lennon has been shot in front of his apartment building and died on the way to the hospital." I immediately called ABC News back. They confirmed it to me. I then knew what the next step should be, and that was to call my boss, Roone Arledge.
Through the IFB, I was listening to the phone calls. They're trying to reach Roone Arledge. Howard Cosell, who said, "What's going on? What's going on?" And, of course, Fran and I looking at each other and trying to keep track of a very important football game.
Butterflies must be churning in the stomach of John Smith, the field goal kicker for New England.
Roone told me what I should do and how I should do it, being very careful about me giving Howard the news because Howard was friends with John Lennon, and Roone knew that he would be upset.
There he is, John Smith, and he could be on the spot in just a moment.
As the game went to commercial break with 40 seconds left, Cosell was uncertain what to do. He told Gifford off the air what he knew, that John Lennon was dead. In the booth, before coming back live, they had less than a minute to decide what to do.
He was shot outside his apartment, the Dakota apartment building. Fellas, I just don't know. I'd like your opinion. I can't see this game situation allowing for that news flash. Can you?
Absolutely, I can see it.
You can?
You betcha. We've got to. If we know it, we've got to do it.
All right.
I don't hang on. It's a tragic moment. And
All right.
this is going to shake up the whole world.
All right. I will get it in. Let Gift call this play, and then I'll get it in.
It was just a situation where you didn't quite know what to do with it. And meanwhile, we decided we would go ahead and go with it.
John Smith is on the line, and I don't care what's on the line, Howard. You have got to say what we know in the booth.
Yes, we have to say it. Remember, this is just a football game, no matter who wins or loses. An unspeakable tragedy confirmed to us by ABC News in New York City. John Lennon, outside of his apartment building on the west side of New York City, the most famous, perhaps, of all of the Beatles, shot twice in the back, rushed to Roosevelt Hospital, dead on arrival.
I thought he handled it extraordinarily well. Honestly, I was still concerned that maybe we had done the wrong thing. As it turns out, we didn't. We informed millions and millions of people that one of the great people of show business had been assassinated.
Hello, everybody. Good evening.
Hey, Jacob. How you doing today?
I'm very well, thank you.
How did you find out about me?
I've been an avid listener of yours for quite some time, and Consciousness Explorer, and I'm glad I kind of ran into you.
What was the material that first grabbed you up from me?
I would say it was the Galactic history, and just your I can't pick anything in particular, but...
Okay. So you've heard me do readings before, I take it?
Absolutely. I found that to be some of your most valuable material.
So what angle do you want to go? You understand what I can do. You have the Akashic record of this world and 20,000 other worlds open to you. Any question? It's all a matter of understanding your context.
I do have several questions. I'd say they would all relate to a personal reading, of course. Mm-hmm. I would potentially like to share a story. I feel like I had kind of a defining moment in my life, or at least my young life. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to maybe get some insight as to what that incident in my life was related to from a deeper Andrew Bartzis style perspective.
Okay.
And beyond about that one incident, I just wanted to get your standard AB reading, where I'm from, what I'm doing, that sort of thing, the kind of information you do on most people's reading.
Okay. You're called a Nevarian. I've only met about 22, 23 of you. You're a bird species. A very, very interesting bird species. Your ka is like a psychic ka that could cross boundaries of galaxies and even universes. You're the type of person that binds with the mate for a very, very long period of a time. And you've heard your psychic ka, your own. And this is what is something that has disturbed your soul for a long time. And it's what led you to understand that you've been a part of jumping through time, realizing that you're not in the same body when you're supposed to be in the same body. And you've learned that this ka, your own psychic ka, is like a homing beacon that's guiding you to moments in history and time so that you're able to do a very specific mission that reconnects the mineral people with the smoke, with that of the prayers and the wisdom. It's a way to craft in the Neanderthal way something of stone and something of crystal so that the Sacred Heart technology is understood at the DNA level, and the conscious application of the sacred is the new way to go, for all other ways have been explored now and have led us away from the earth. And that's ultimately your position, to lead people back to earth. There's a great wisdom in your heart and a great wisdom in your mind, and that would happen to you as a child. There should be no more tears from it, no more fears, no more limitations, and no more expectations, because that was the end of your time traveling wars. You graduated that. And to be a bird species that's graduated, that means you can activate the psychic cause of many, many others out there. For those that have listened to me for some time before, you hear me talking about the great homing beacon that turns on in your head. And this person is an example of that. He just turned on his own homing beacon. Okay, do you have questions about this?
I was prepared to actually describe what my first 10 minutes of my morning was, so I was pleasantly surprised. You went right into my reading.
Mm-hmm.
And that Aaron, you said?
Yep. Tell me about what happened. Tell me about what happened.
I'm going to need about 2 minutes or so to maybe go over this. It's not a long story, but I will maybe need 2 minutes to speak, so I'll begin now.
Go ahead.
About 10 years ago, March 2004, I was 18. I was late at night, and I was kind of driving aimlessly. I was in a bit of a state of despair. A cop car kind of stealthily was pulled up behind me, was following me for a bit. And he switched on his light to kind of pull me over. And I don't know, I don't know what I was thinking. Maybe he just kind of caught me off guard. But I ended up refusing to stop. I kept driving, and soon more and more police cars were now following me with the lights on in an attempt to pull me over. Mm-hmm. Eventually, they ran me off the road, and although that didn't stop me either, so several of the police officers were now, kind of in the area, began to fire at my car, and I was peppered with a few dozen bullets into the vehicle. As a miracle, I wasn't hit. I don't know how, but ballistic pulled a crazy amount of bullets out of the car, and yet a single one didn't seem to have hit me. Anyway, my car was damaged and stopped soon after. I surrendered and I was arrested. I was interrogated for a while by a detective who was trying to pressure me into a confession that would have kind of justified their excessive force. I didn't give them that kind of confession. I was just like a scared teenage kid, at the time. A detective came to my house the next day. I was charged and let off on bail. The detective came over and offered to buy the car from my father. In return, they said if they bought the car from us, the charges would be loosened and reduced, and if we cooperated, of course. Now, at the time, I was suffering a bit of PTSD and depression from the whole incident. I started seeing a psychiatrist. This became part of my defense. Mm-hmm. At this point, there were a few incidents of me being stalked and harassed by the local police, relating to my infamy, I suppose. I explained this to a court-ordered mental assessment, and they took this as delusions of a schizophrenic, that I'm being stalked or, whatever by the police, when in fact, there's witnesses, there was nothing delusional about it. They attempted to have me committed for a longer observational period of time. My family and I thought this was dangerous, and I made the decision to flee. So I snuck out of Canada, and I fled to the U.S., and from the U.S., I flew out of New York, and I flew to Europe, to my parents' home country. There I spent some time voluntarily institutionalized to get some evidence to support my case that I wasn't crazy. I spent a few of my formative years traveling through Europe, doing things in Europe. Finally, I decided to return to Canada and face the music. I spent some time in free trial custody, ended up pleading guilty to a few charges. Some charges were dropped. I received time served. I went on with my life, and I'm living quite fine from there. It was a bit of a shake-up in my life. It sort of derailed my normal plans for adulthood, but it set me on a path. I really can't regret what happened, as traumatic and everything as it may have been, as I don't think I would be here pursuing this level of consciousness exploration right now if it wasn't for all the things that were set in motion from that point forward. So that's kind of my story, and again, it goes back to March 2004, and I was just wondering, what did I trip over?
Do you know
that
what
night?
day? Do you know what day in March 2004?
I can't remember the specific date, but I'm feeling like it's 24th of March, but I could be completely mistaken.
Okay. The 4th of March is a very significant date.
It might have been the 4th of March as well.
Very, very significant. 2004. What do you remember about that history of that time?
I remember that I would say, lost. I feel I was completely, just the word lost, I suppose, comes to mind.
Right.
And
what that is your psychic ka came through. And that psychic ka had a whole bunch of other things behind it.
Yes.
And one of the reasons I selected you is because of this. 2004. Some years ago, there was a great slaying of a great musician named Kurt Cobain. He was a timeline genocide victim that has triggered an entire paradox. The third paradox was triggered by the death of Kurt Cobain. And what that did is led a rebellion of musicians. And there were a whole bunch of musicians who figured out they were going to be really famous during the 60s and 70s and 80s. And all they had to do was figure out how to keep their ass alive during that time. And there was a timeline where the Janis Joplins, the Jimi Hendrix, the Beatles, all of them, they all lived, every single one of them. Not one of them was gone. And it would be in 2004 that they would have all been out on tour. And every single one of them had decided at that date that they were going to be broadcasting at the same time. It was like the oldies tour. All of the oldies in 2004 got for a Legends tour. And simultaneously in 126 countries, they had disclosure. And that's the day they killed the music. What does music mean to you?
I don't know, an outlet, something to connect to a beat with.
It represents the beating of your wings, the beating of your heart, your connection to the earth. When music is killed, we go back to that primal ka, that need for the mate, that need for that companion, that wisdom, that connectingness to the earth. And what you're asking out of this reading is a great connection, so that you're plugged in to your legacy and your experience in the car. You could have stopped, but you couldn't at the same time. You know what I'm talking about?
Was there any kind of karmic resolution, whether it was consent or by...
No. There was another version of you who was erased in the day the music died. You would have been on stage with someone like, I think, a blues person. I don't know who this person is. But that signaled the end of the paradox, the beginning of the paradox. And this life you have now, one of the great things that were done is those that were a part of the day of disclosure, the system of karma hit really, really hard. And it made sure that you couldn't be musicians these lifetimes. You couldn't have that heart connection, that you had to go at a way that was going to be very, 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 very hard to get through, where you had to go into the deepest, highest points of the mind disconnected from the heart, and the highest points of the heart disconnected from the mind, through the dark nights of the soul, through thousands of lifetimes, until finally the the power of your angelic presence, your photonic light being that's still anchored with the dream world came through. And that's how your masculine, your shamanic masculine side etched its way through the fire that made sure when you got pulled over and boxed in and the bullets were flying, that there was other versions of you who had made another choice or another choice or another choice or another choice. So you were guided into that position so that you actually had the point in your life to create sacred space in your pericardium, the sac of fluid water around your heart, so that you can recycle those waters. And then once again, look at this world with clear eyes, not influenced by the pains of the old. When you went back and faced those charges, it was as if they were almost nothing to your real reality, because you had consciously manifested your reality and actually changed your reality. That is the power of the change that you went through.
Very fascinating.
So what I want to know, and I'm scanning through your records here just a second. I'm looking into the third, into the fourth paradox. I have never read anyone that's been around the day the music died. I've only mentioned it a few times on air. And there's a reason I do these types on air. There we go. In your seventh consecutive epoch, an epoch is the seventh rung of your DNA, in which for your first immigration into Earth. And your first immigration to Earth was 31 million years ago. You had been occupying Arcturian and Syrian animal frequencies. You had not incarnated as that physical incarnation, more like their versions of cats and dogs, their versions of soul assistance spirits. Though you could go back and forth in between them, you mainly chose more of an animal type form there. And the commonness of your soul is to maintain an animal relationships with a few dozen planets, and there's a series of breeding groups that you go through. And these breeding groups ask that you come and return every few million years to assist the next crew coming out, and then the next and the next and the next. And there's this big rotation of people whose souls return home and then escort new souls to their new planetary experience or to the new solar experience, so that they always have soul family to travel with. You have missed several of these because of your being trapped here on Earth. And you have a great desire to leave this place. At the same time, you know you can't, because you have to finish something very, very important here. And I want to talk about what your purpose is here.
Yes, please.
What is your purpose?
Potentially to share the light with others.
What's the light?
I don't know. I think maybe self-healing, self-forgiveness, something to free others from their own crosses that they bear. I don't know.
That's all belief system you're talking there. What is the light?
I don't know.
That's your purpose. You have been betrayed by false light. That is the only way they could have killed the music. Have you heard me talk about false light before?
I believe so, yes.
False light technology that was brought to this world to start kicking people out of the astral world, because people weren't coming in because it was getting so bad. The incarnation and reincarnation period. Here's wars, the worst that you could think about. Humans were the darkest ass people in the universe at that time. Why? Because there had been 30 million years of consecutive spiritual warfare and physical warfare here, and we got really damn good at erasing planets. We got really, really good at it. And we got cocky, we got arrogant, and we got full of vanity. And then the kill shot came.
Was I involved in what you described now and before, which was in an attempt for, I guess, Earth to protect itself? We kind of flipped from light to bad in that process?
Yes, but it was a different version. There was the Crystal Cities. Is that what you're referring to? The Crystal War Cities?
I do recall you describing how Earth took a role in psychically erasing other planets in an attempt to protect itself from invasion. Was I involved in that? Is that what you're describing?
No. You were involved in a different version of it. That was just one example, but that type of warfare went on and on and on and on for a very long time. There was a particular thing where Earth was using unity consciousness as its ultimate resistance to the way free will was being used. There was this big push in the universe that was fresh free will to go in one direction and to break the uni-mind. And Earth put all their power into the individual micros attached to the macro entity of Earth through elemental beings of creation, co-creation, and reality programming, which made Earth very, very different than every other planet in the universe, and as well as the 16 other universes. What you were able to do is scramble the perception of Earth. So you could create a time warp camouflage around Earth. And then you could make shadow Earths. And you could make it in such a way that beings that were trying to look through the camouflage could track these shadow Earths. And you would set time-space ripples to collect tens of thousands of different people who intended to use time travel for very nefarious purposes and send them to the void or to a vortex in between some other universes in which they had no chance to survive or no chance to have an existence. So you were what are called a surgical eraser, preventing timeline genocides from coming to Earth. And it was a very necessary position. And you were very, very good at it.
Was it necessary, or did I step out of, say, a neutral position into something more polarized and made mistakes? I mean, that doesn't sound very.
Your soul had already long gone through that. This was at the end when your soul was done flipping between light and dark. Because you can be the dark and kill planets, and you can be the light and kill planets, and that's what Earth was proving. That you did not just have to choose light and dark, and that light and dark could work together. And that's what it was showing when what it was doing. And that spawned the third and fourth and fifth and sixth options of free will. You set yourself up in a karmic path by going to those extremes many times, both light and dark. At the end, you bound yourself to have to be until the end. Because you erased so many individual experiences, and each individual experiences that you erased had to be returned through a karmic reprisal. And there were lifetimes in which you could resolve large volumes of it, and there were other lifetimes you couldn't resolve anything. Do you understand what I'm saying there?
I think so.
Okay. Do you have any questions?
Is there anything in recent past lives of interest that you see maybe sticking out out of curiosity?
Oh, 1880s. 1850s to 1880s. You were on a Spanish fishing vessel that was just fishing until one day they pulled something up out of the ocean that was very, very valuable. And you began selling it to different nobles, and what it turned out to be was pieces of a spaceship, actually. And there was quite a big need to get you there. That was your last one. And before that, let me look. 1800s, just lots of fishing. So that was the payoff of the fishing life. So let me go back one more epoch. So 1300. Still an agrarian. You spend like 800 years resolving all your agrarian issues from doing orbital bombardments on other planets. So you had to go back and be a farmer. And all those things that you helped farm back to life was resolving all of that karma. Let's go to about 2200 AD. It looks like we're on Antarctica. Let me see, what are you doing here? This is where you died. Track you back, boat to Madagascar, Saudi Arabia, Mosul. Your library. You say you're part of the Library of Nivea exploration. This is from the
more general question that maybe you could also answer to the audience as well.
Sure.
I'm just curious on the topic of, for instance, names. Do we have any kind of influence as a soul before we incarnate here or reincarnate? We have a name, and I feel like the name, your given name, has got a lot of importance, and I've never been particularly crazy about my name. Again, Jacob. I'm just wondering, do I have a soul name? And if you could maybe...
Everyone has a soul name. And naming is a sacred process in which we go through our personal rites of passage to say, I do not need to use this slave name, which is your all capital letters name when you had your foot stamped. And when you want to change your name, you can change it to anything you want, but you don't record it. You don't go back to the system and say, that's my branded stamped name. It's important that you take it on as a spiritual thing, and you let your straw man die. And the straw man is something that many, many people in this world are going to have to learn to listen, because it is a magical spell. Things that are in your pockets called Federal Reserve notes, or whatever piece of money you have around them.
Would I be able to be filled in on my soul name, perhaps?
It isn't my purpose to give soul names. That's for you to search for, because only you are going to know what's your true signature frequency in a time like of the Great Dreamtime Awakening. It'd be like telling you, all of the secrets before the game is over.
That's understandable, no problem.
Well, I have got to move on to the next segment here, though. This has been very, very exciting.
Well, thank you, Andrew. It was an amazing honor to actually have an opportunity to speak with you tonight.
You too. Thanks a lot.
We spoke last time about the music and using the toning fork over the crown chakra and toning at the same time to try to heal. And I haven't bought a tuning fork just yet. When it comes to the hertz, I heard that what we use it as a standard at this time is not really the best because of say for example, A. In, I believe, 450 hertz. It would be best, instead of using that, to use 432 for some reason. And
the natural earth harmony of love frequency is 432. And in the mid 1700s, maybe even as early as the late 1600s, the Illuminati cabal of that area knew that music, which was everybody's instruments, were naturally tuned to 432. Like when you made a let's say a violin that had catgut as the catgut sinews as the strings with the feather bow or whatever it was. It naturally vibrated at that already. And then they began to make mechanical instruments that would change the tuning of that natural wood catgut musical instrument, brass instrument with a woodwind, whatever it was. They literally could figure out how to alter the individual instruments so the overall orchestra was tuned to 452, 4/7, whatever else they were doing, which was a frequency that doesn't have an equational end. It reaches a point and it just falls off. It reaches a point and just falls off.
How about everything they've calibrated everything to that? I mean, you go into any store, music store, and you sit down in front of a keyboard, it's tuned to that, right?
Correct. And even those laugh tracks, those laughter tracks, those are the most insidious weapons that are out there. When you're laughing at 572 hertz and it's actually something completely opposite of the laughter, it's opening a portal of dimensional crap in you.
Okay. Pretty annoying.
So there was a conscious effort. There was actually a conscious effort to remove 432 from musicians so that 7 generations later it was commonly accepted, so that all the guitars, all the musical instruments, everything that's built is already tuned to that fake harmony, and there's generations of belief behind it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And speaking of music, I've had quite a few dreams with different musicians. Bob Marley has come into my dreams, James Brown, and it's funny I just feel like, oh, that's a special dream, and I could see them. I feel like there's still that play there, in the dream world. But
they're muses at this point in time. Bob Marley is already back into a body, and how do I put this? They've left a part of their consciousness, like a soul shard, and given it a purpose to become a muse. But not a muse to a few individuals, but to tens of thousands, or millions even. Look how much Bob Marley's music has affected people. When I first started doing radio, my very first radio show, A Psychic's Tale, used Bob Marley's Stand Up for Your Rights as its opening music. Because it was an important song to me at that time, that people stood up for their rights because they were being abused and had no idea that they were even being abused.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, I nicknamed it, we were all eating the bullshit sandwich with mozzarella cheese on it and loving it.
Uh-huh. What really killed him? What happened there? I mean, because it doesn't make sense to me.
That's part of the day the music died, where they erased what people could have really done to change this world. All the musicians, all the musicians collected at one point in time, in no time, and realized that through music they could make what's called a consciousness first strike, because the amount of people that hold them in such high regard and high trust. The day the music died was on multiple dimensions timelines. Many musicians got together that were on a world tour, because John Lennon didn't die. None of the big guys died in this alternative timeline. They were all living all the way into the mid-early 90s. And so they were on their reunion tour. The age of rock was coming back and going to pass generations. And they all agreed that at one point in time, which would have been August 21st, 1996 in this alternate timeline, that they were all going to suddenly stop their tour, and mid-song, simultaneously 100 bands spread around the world on their tour would disclose the truth to their audience.
I see.
And that needed to be stopped, because that was something that was never foreseen in any way, shape, or form. And that type of power could not be allowed even in one musician. And that's why our musicians at the highest levels are totally dominated and controlled.
Now, just so we can stay on the earlier side of the 20th century, the banking system after the Second World War was very firmly established. via the manipulations between wars. And one of the things that seemed to go into higher gear after World War II was essentially a progressive, if you like, program to actually pick up nations that weren't fully bankrupted and controlled by the banking system. They began the Bank of International, the International Monetary Fund, I think, appeared about that time, and its purpose appeared to be to get other countries sucked into the banking system so they could control their economies.
Marshall Plan.
Yeah. And that obviously that's actually still going on.
Correct.
That plan never actually ended. So, Andrew, why don't you give us if you like, a summary of the major plays that were taking place during that first 50 years of the...
How about I eliminate it from 1948 to 1958?
Okay.
Because there were cultural changes that were the result of them doing too many wars, that they rapidly had to readjust the way technology was coming out and the way the system of domination and control was using television, because they were waking more people up by doing it too fast and they needed to slow down. So what they decided to do was to make sure they brought in the true debt enslavement instruments on a nation level, so that nation level would use these debt instruments, and the people that ran those nations would be the contract holders of creating that negativity instead of the system itself.
Okay.
So you had Germany being rebuilt. Its Treaty of Versailles debt was supposedly wiped out, but in actuality it wasn't. You had the Americans that ultimately their currency became the world currency, that the founding technologies that became the intermediary technologies of exchange, from tickers that reported the stock markets in New York to actual systems that had hardwires that could record every stock exchange in the United States or anywhere in the world, even if it was the old, teletype system.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then the foundation, and then you led into the first satellite system, communication system a little further on. The implementation of debt control instruments was the most vital thing that they could do to dominate people long-term that they wouldn't understand short-term.
So you're talking about, at ground level, the mortgage industry.
Correct.
Cranked up. And then later in that century we get into, the credit card system, which was obviously the overlay for that. The other thing that pops out in my mind as being a significant aspect of that first 10 years post-war is the appearance of the television system and the advertising industry.
Yep.
Centered around the television system, because that really, really cranked up the pressure on the collectives,
right.
The mind control of the collective.
Instead of a transition from print media to television like it was originally planned, they were just going to put television out, and the system expected the print media to instantly die, but it didn't. So they actually used it to its advantage for many years, and they didn't allow the print system to die until we are in the now times, the 2000s. Mm-hmm. But what was ultimately there means the system of domination and control had to have fully functional agents in all aspects of the media, and all aspects of the media had to have recruiters that could find talent, the same way the collegiate system found talent, so that they could be put through the programs of domination and control to determine who will play ball and who could be bought off by hookers or drugs. Or in the 50s scenario, it's widely known that Elvis and many of the big singers were given vitamins, and they were told they were vitamins, and in fact they were methamphetamine.
Wow. Charming. Okay. Now, the music industry has always been particularly dark, and I guess one of the other things that appeared was, the record. And,
correct.
And, hard on the heels of that, well, not hard on the heels of that, 20 years later or so, the tape technology. But the music industry from the beginning, and you can see it's the appearance of the control mechanisms, particularly in the cities where the music industry dominated.
Right. Memphis,
Tennessee, Las Vegas, Los Angeles.
Yep.
These have been central cities involved in those industries, and there is a complete satanic system, control system, quite dark system that was embedded from the very beginning in that system there. Because my own father was involved in the music industry in this country, and there was always this element of shenanigans going on in the background that were not very nice.
Correct.
I mean, that began well and truly, was established in the music industry right back then. You only have to look at the careers that were actually launched and then ruined. Launched and ruined, launched and ruined. Ruined by what? Well, drugs, obviously sex, ruined relationships, various other things that went on. Massive manipulation.
Every country has their own version of Jimmy Savile times 100 or more.
Indeed. Yeah, it turns out that one of our supposed musical favourites, a gentleman called Rolf Harris, was involved with that as well. So, and there's another guy who's actually in court at the moment as a result of things that he did 20, 30 years ago in a TV show that he was involved with. That whole pedophilic, satanic aspect. Now, when did that aspect and the gentleman who is actually pivotal in pulling together a lot of that stuff, whose name has gone right out of my head, a very dark gentleman who did all sorts of things in the music industry, well, in the entertainment industry and elsewhere. His name will come back to me in a minute. Aleister Crowley.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. At what point was the satanic aspect and the paedophilic aspect, really firmly embedded in the media and entertainment industry? Can you pick out a period of time when that happened?
The satanic pedophilia organizations had been in existence for many thousands of years. It's what created the church's intermediary thug groups. It's what corrupted people that were in the Spanish Inquisition. It had already been ingrained into the system. So it was only natural that you took the best of those at the time and ingrained them into the fundamentals of the founding media concepts from the Marconi radio time.
Yeah, so it was never not there.
It was never not there.
Yep, fair enough, because I can see how that they've always worked that way. It just it gets applied to every situation pretty much, including politics.
Oh yeah,
it's always there.
Now, how many times have you turned down the Rainmaker?
Many times.
Many. That's because you got heart and you got soul, and you know if you took that deal with the devil, you'd be dead.
Yeah, it doesn't even look appetizing.
That's right.
And but also to my fellow man, by, like you say, creating, and putting your spirit out there sure covers a lot of ground, and it says a lot for everyone. We're all in this together. If we just embrace, and all these people that are here on this call and follow you, Andrew, are like-minded people. They want to know, and they want to connect. And this is a lovely, lovely thing. And thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm just pulling some really dense energies out of your throat right now. When you tried your talking to the story, your fire to the story, how did that go?
It went real well. In fact, my voice is already starting to clear up. Thank you.
And I know people can hear it.
I was later when I told my story in front of the fire. And, you know, I just felt lighter. I felt sort of some of the weight off my shoulders. And
what I'd like you to do is to go back to the fire and go, you know, I've told my story, but there are some scenarios in which I never got to speak in my life. And I think in your 30, 40 years in the industry, you knew that there were times that you just shut up and took the money. So whatever drama was going on was going on. And there are things that you need to say about the industry in the 40 years that only you and the fire need to know.
Absolutely. A lot of that negative works that I was a part of was never the purpose. The purpose was playing with the other musicians.
Absolutely.
And there was always the joy there, so it was a protective field or a protective place I was in. And you're absolutely right with the corruption of the movies and the records, and it's all done on purpose.
Right.
Not to say there's not great artists out there, they are, but signing the deal with the Rainmaker, no. And I know people that's done it, and unfortunately, they're not here anymore.
That's right. They didn't make that deal with the devil. Yeah. So when you get a chance to go in front of that fire again, you're saying it for yourself in your own way, but you're also saying it for every other musician that took that Rainmaker's deal and they're trapped and they're out. Because telling the truth at that level from the inside to that element of fire is a great healing for your soul. And for all those that never knew they could do it. And when you choose to do it out loud by the fire and enter it into the Earth Akashic record, every being who's ever heard one note of your music now has that in their energetic frequency of unity of what went on in the music industry. The truth. And the good truths. Not just the bad truths. The good truths, too. That's why you bringing that collective of collectives to that cyst is so important. Because you're going to link every note that you've ever played that's ever been recorded, has ever been live on air or listened to. All of those beings now have access to the collective. And all you got to do is tell the rest of the truth. Just you and the fire. It's not about drama or anyone listening in or writing it down. It's your chance to do what's just right to your soul.
Thank you.
Yeah, nobody's saying anything. I mean, you know, you have a few people who say like Sac de la Rocha and Rage Against the Machine and what he did, but really, kind of, there was just only went up to a certain point, you know, and then everything goes quiet, and you just see all these musicians out there. Nobody's saying anything. Nothing. I mean,
they know. They know if they.
That's the platform, you know.
They know. They know exactly if they say anything that's out of line, they will lose significant amounts of money. I've had opportunities to have some very important musicians come on to this type of show, and their lawyers have told them that they can't, or their contract would be null and void if they go on to anything that's not mainstream approved.
Wow.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Well, they have to get them cojones, Andrew. I mean, come on, you know.
It isn't about cojones. It's about understanding they would be blacklisted, and they've seen hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other get blacklisted.
Yeah.
You know, we're talking the guys that survived the 90s musical-wise, got past the drugs and saw the truth of light, and they want to come back into music. They're making their new things. They're on tour, and now they know that they can't step out of line. They cannot, or the tour ends and the collection agencies come and take it all back.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, this world works that way. So then what can the musicians do? Make their music and let it spread naturally, not like a virus, just like a natural sharing process, so that people allow the music and the lyrics to naturally awaken them at the subconscious and conscious level.
Mm-hmm.
And the music is such a...
part of my responsibility.
Yeah, it's such a responsibility that we have. You know, even music without lyrics still speaks.
Yes, yes. I feel that responsibility, and that's why I say, well, it's time to get back on. I mean, there's so much more to do. You know, my father played guitar. He played rancheras, you know, like the old Mexican songs, and he also played accordion. And from the family, you know, I was the only one who actually picked it up at the age of 18 and picked up the guitar and finally started, you know, learning it. So that's like such a gift, and that's why, you know, I really honor him. And now my brother Ben, he's picked up the flute. It's funny. He's so funny because he can't play percussion. His timing is horrible. You get him on a drum, and, you know, it's like, please get off of that because he's just not doing it right. But when he gets on the flute, all of a sudden it's like the flower just opens, you know. He can just wow you. It is so interesting, you know, just the difference when it comes to these instruments and how you can have horrible timing in one, but the other one is
perfect in the other. Like you give me a saxophone with a number 2.5 reed, an alto sax with a 2.5 reed, a really old school 2.5 reed, I can do amazing things. But you give me an alto sax with a 3-inch reed, I can't do nothing with it. Or a baritone, or you give me a drum. I'm really good on the drums, but you give me a djembe drum, I'm not coordinated in that way unless I have somebody running the rhythm. And I've noticed that too in my own musical expression. And then, you know, when you switch totally and you go to a different embouchure and you're using something like a trumpet, and you've got all of this space that's inside the machine of the trumpet that's got these little keys that alter the airflow.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah, my brother is funny in that way, but it's just beautiful to see him just take it on and just really just take off, go into little caves or go into tunnels and just play the flute, and it's beautiful to have that. I mean, he's had it rough, and just to know that he has that as one of his tools and something that he gifts people has given him so much strength, because he's had a very, very rough. I mean, he came into this world and as a newborn with the umbilical cord wrapped around his neck, you know, blue. And, I mean, it feels like starting out, having that rough start really, you know, really damaged him and really hurt him quite a bit. And that's because of that, he had a lot of issues throughout his whole life. And he's really surpassed a lot of that and gone past a lot of that, you know, with a lot of support from other family members. But it's been heavy duty for him, and we've gone through a lot of fighting, you know. But now more than ever, now there's just a lot of love, you know, a lot of just understanding. We talk to each other, we tell each other what's on our minds, we tell each other we love each other, and then we've come a long way.
That's wonderful to hear that. And there are so many families out there that have gone through their own version of their healings, where the brothers didn't have much of a relationship at the younger life, and at an older life, as the parents pass on, they carry the tradition on of having a relationship. And that's wonderful. And to see him opening up to the flute, you know, you can tell him that he's played the flute 1,000,000 times in 1,000,000 different lifetimes. It's one of the most ancient instruments out there. The drum was the first teaching shaman. That's what the fire, and then the drum. I'm sorry, the fire was the first tool, and then the second was the drum, and the third was the flute. They're some of the most easiest things to make. By your hand with dry wood, or even not even dry wood, you can figure out how to make something that has an angle which will echo through a tube.
Uh-huh.
You know,
Andrew, you mentioning that reminds me of an eagle bone flute that my friend David had made. Why were they using eagle bone?
Because there's the alchemy of what the bones of the eagle represent. Are you familiar with the bones of avians? They're very hollow. They're very porous.
Yeah, a bit, yes.
So they make a very different resonant sound when air moves through them.
Mm-hmm. Does that break a lot of dense energy also in blowing that?
Oh yeah. When you have an eagle bone flute that's been properly made, not only does it blow the dense energy, it immediately brings this connection to the sky in, as well as every time that eagle has ever done a dive bomb and then suddenly pull its wings up to grab a fish out of the water, you have all of those predatory techniques removed from predating and put into a flute that has musical connections connected to a heart. So you make these rhythms of this diving action, and then it pulls back into complete lightness. You can use that to not only break up dense energies, attack entities, or to create massive fortifications of air energy around individuals that are being affected by some other type of air negative entity. A few hundred eagle bone flutes in one area that has massive pollution. Let's say like you were in the center of Hong Kong on the worst, or Shanghai on the worst, where you could it's everywhere. You could dissipate all of that.
And one thing I think about is the deep connection with the vocal and the hands.
Oh yeah.
They work so closely together. I feel it. I mean, like I said, I'm still learning about it and trying to figure out exactly how to. But they're just so in tune with one another. Well,
people talk with their hands. People music with their hands too, because it alters the way the auric field is sharing the sound frequency. Example, if I'm going to go and make an intonation, there's a reverberation in my aura. If I'm sharing emotional empathic energy with that intoning, the aura is going to have multiple layers of vibratory frequencies in it that enhance the note or the music or whatever it is, because music isn't heard note to note. It is literally heard from the first note. You already know the last note, because it's a frequency equation that is a sound wave based in a light frequency reality. And our brain perceives at the speed of the light. So the second the first tone is going, you have created something that is alternate of this Roman numeral time space, and it is a wavelength, and that wavelength can be instantly compressed down to a single synopsis of everything that it is. So once music begins, we become more multidimensional because we are connected to the sine wave of the sound energy that is still a light frequency, and we are light experiencing bodies. Welcome everyone to another episode of Adventures into Reality. Here we are at the Galactic Historian Studio Extreme. I am joined by Natalie. Natalie, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Andrew. And boy, do we have an awesome show packed for you guys today. I think the question on everybody's lips right now, Andrew, is what's the deal with Paul McCartney?
What's the deal with Paul McCartney? The Sir John McCartney that we all know and come to have loved today is said to have died in 1966 in an accident, and all the Beatles members have been keeping it a secret since then. Now, this is one of those conspiracy theories that has jumped generations, and we've heard of numerous composers, musicians, thinkers, and philosophers who have survived a supposed death to go on and do something else in obscurity. But in this one, he didn't go on into obscurity. He went on into international fame, became knighted by the Queen herself. That's how far that went. Mm-hmm. So, Natalie, what were your views of the Beatles growing up? I mean, how much did they affect you?
Oh, well, growing up in the countries I grew up in, I mean, we knew about the Beatles, but it wasn't as, crazy as out here. I love their music. I really did. And but I love their music amongst a whole bunch of other groups as well. But there were certain songs that really affected me, triggered something in me, stirred something up in my soul. And I think that's what made them so famous. They had some kind of an equation that really affected humanity in a really, really big way.
So for those of you out there that are new and maybe don't know much about the Beatles, if you go into any search engine and you type in F-A-U-L McCartney, and that is the faux Paul McCartney. That is the person that replaced him. And this person was supposedly a body double that had won a contest, and then after his death, they learned he was an okay guitarman. They put a big-ass beard on him, and they went on world tour. And each of the individuals had denied it over many years, and then when Ringo Starr on his deathbed began to say that he really died, and many of them couldn't take it, and even John Lennon and Yoko Ono, they all knew. Everyone inside the band knew. And then you had the higher-up corporate execs who knew they were making billions upon billions. They were also imprinting a reality with a whole new brand of advertising.
So how many people do you think actually knew? I mean, first of all, is this true? I mean, give us your take on it, first of all. I mean, we're kind of looking at what people are saying, but what's your take? Did this really happen?
Oh, yeah. Oh, it really happened.
Okay. And how many people knew in the beginning?
Hundreds.
Wow. And it was
every major investigative agency knew and was paid off. Like the CIA, the NSA, the Russians, all of the major agencies knew.
So they duplicated his fingerprints. I mean, how do they all do that from the medical perspective, from the DNA perspective? I mean, how
Well,
was
it
that
wasn't DNA.
orchestrated?
He was a body double, and at that point in history, it was easy to change out records. There was no digital data.
So they just changed out the records?
Just change out the records. That's the way it was done then. The world was a very different level of corruption that we have today. It was non-digital, off-books corruption. So a very different style. And as the story grew and grew and their popularity grew and grew, the amount of bribes grew and grew and grew. And so finally a bunch of people had to be killed off so they wouldn't sell their story in the early 80s or the early 90s.
But how could the Queen, for example, not know? Or did she know and she was just playing along? I mean, at the pinnacle of what she is and who she is, I mean, surely when it's a person, a being that affects millions across the world.
Why wouldn't you knight a being that's affected millions of people? You're projecting power, aren't you? That is the Queen's duty. Do you think she's the only queen that's ever projected false power out of a person they promoted? Every queen in history has done it.
Like you always say, there's a bear shit in the woods.
Does a bear? Exactly. If it doesn't hear it, anyone's there to hear it, you know? So, going further and further into this conspiracy of Paul McCartney, it came to a point where, as I said, Ringo Starr was on his deathbed, and he's beginning to reveal all the truths. You know, what hasn't he told us about John Lennon and his death, or what has Yoko Ono known? It was a great time of change. The world was within a hair's breadth of unity consciousness. The people were out in the streets. They were making change. There was separation of densities clearly at that time. You had the change in the rebalancing of the racial values. You had science that was meeting mysticism, that was confronting the church power and domination and control. For years in a row, they were out marching in the streets with flower power. And when Paul McCartney, was replaced, it was an understanding that if they didn't keep up that charade, what might happen to that whole group of people that had sought that energy.
So do you think that this was all remote viewed, and this car accident that he supposedly, well, he did die in it, obviously. This car accident that he died in, was this an accident? Was this remote viewed? I mean, how was this all constructed, and how many years ago was this actually planned?
Well, thousands of years ago.
I see.
It is a timeline incursion. Whenever they or the system or an individual removes themselves from a reality through a death, and you are a gigantic personality such as that, you are making a statement, no matter what. You are a statement being from the moment you're a fetus. So his statement was overridden. Okay? Or was his statement that I will be replaced so that I would not kill the movement?
Okay. And then also, as you can see now, when you said already at the beginning of this year and at the end of last year, you were saying that many things will be revealed. There'll be huge, people on their deathbeds admitting to things that most people would have never even considered, would never even come into their mindset. And we were talking about this earlier, calamity. The calamity now of all the people that had this belief in their system that this was one person, and now their world is just breaking apart. And this is actually on propaganda news as well. This isn't just on the internet.
The news agency, NBC and CBS News, have both got caught with their major news reporters NBC and Fox, both with their major news reporters, actually reporting false stories. In one instance, Bill O'Reilly is making direct statements where he was in a country and making a report and not actually there. Now, that's common practice in our news industry. So what does that tell you about the overall power of the news industry to craft a reality that has no truth behind it?
Well, we can't even get the right color of a dress these days, so I mean, how can we then see if that's real, what they're showing us in the news?
So the news of the 1960s was very different. They had war correspondents on the things showing blood and guts, not like they do today. And in America at that point wasn't doing the best in the war. They weren't the top dog in that area because it was an entrenched ancient warfare that was just bogging them down. You had Paul McCartney, you had the Beatles, you had all the other musicians of that time that were singing for freedom. And when freedom interacted with the revolution of drugs, sex, and rock and roll is where the system of domination and control began to individually limit some of these very powerful personalities. And in Paul's situation, it was an actual attempt at timeline genocide to remove his true signature frequency from the Beatles. Important because there's millions upon millions of women and men who have had intense sexual fantasies from their heroes and musicians growing up, one of them being Paul McCartney.
Also absolutely accentuated with all the drugs and everything else that was going on in that time. Just, I mean, that must have been so intense.
Right, for every person that's ever said, oh, I met Paul McCartney or Ringo Starr, that story they've retold every time to their children or to their loved ones. And now that story has something removed from it.
And now, what does it look like to the children when they're like, well, you didn't even know that this guy wasn't even real? I mean, literally a thread is being pulled in the structure, and you're starting to see a slow collapse of what was to what should be, what is now.
In that construct of creating the fake Paul McCartney, think of a Jenga tower, and you've pulled out one and you know it's over. There's no move to make without the tower to fall over. And that is where the Beatles are at right now. Are there other musicians out there that are just like that? Elvis.
That's right.
Has left the building, but Elvis is still alive. And hundreds of others throughout time have made the exit stage right.
Oh, hang on a second. You just said live that Elvis is still alive? So he's still alive?
Elvis is still alive.
So what was the story there? I mean, they said he overdosed on drugs and they found him in a hotel room somewhere, wasn't that?
Well, in Elvis's situation, he had reached a point where he understood that the doctors of that area were prescribing them vitamins or Vitamix. And if anyone knows their World War II history, Vitamix is what they were feeding Adolf Hitler, and it is methamphetamine.
Wow.
And they did this to just about every major country rock and roll star. It was common practice to give uppers and downers and for them to go 4 or 5 days without sleep. And he got to a point where he could not function like that anymore, and he left, disappeared. And the agency that owned his music had to figure out, because the living will said, I'm leaving, and there were multiple copies of the living will, but they couldn't find him for the first 8 years. And when they did find him, they said, you have to remain dead because there's, $35 billion on the line over the next 20 years. So, and he's not the first big person in production history that has exited that way. He had enough dirt on everyone in the industry to prove how corrupt that they were. Came at a time where most musicians, they were lucky if they saw 1% of their total earnings. Okay? And if you were a black person at that time, you're lucky if you saw 0.25%. You didn't own your material, ever. You had no ownership of it. You were lucky if you got any percentage of the take you actually did. And then your managers were dosing you with drugs.
I mean, that's quite shocking when you start to see, the background behind how they get these performers to just keep going and just get their artistic talent out of them, but just make sure that everything else is really not functioning. Just the pure skill to bring it out, when they need to bring it out.
When you look at those movies created in the 40s and 50s that were the Hollywood-centric movies of the time with the great big guys, those guys were flying high in barbiturates and speeds and opiates because there was an on-set pharmacist that did that for them, because they filmed some of those movies in 18, 20, 25 days, and everyone stayed on set and no one left until they were done.
So they just kept that locus reality and that current dream that they were creating to project, they kept that alive. So Mork and Mindy, that's also a good one. They were supposedly always taking very hard drugs.
Cocaine, generally, in general, because they could speak fast and have their creativity pop into them. In most scenarios, methamphetamine or the speed-based things to just crank them up so they could go on stage and their heart wouldn't explode.
So how many, I mean, okay, let's go from a percentage, because I know there are a lot of names you don't really want to name on who's still out there. But from a percentage of all the people that we know that are famous, that are dead in the industry, in the entertainment industry, be it music or TV, what percentage are actually still here?
Not many. It's an elite club.
An elite club, okay.
For you to remain dead and the public to allow you to remain dead, because in today's society, there's facial recognition software that can get you off of bank camera within minutes. Within minutes. That's the nature of Big Brother. 30 years ago, the Big Brother infrastructure didn't exist. So it was only a handful of elites that understood what level of blackmail it took for you to stay alive. Because once you got somewhere, you probably had 5 months until you were fine. That's how powerful the agency's physical boots on the ground resources were at that time. So once you got found, or once you left a trail, they could remote view you. And once they could directly remote view you, depending on what you knew about being able to escape. In Elvis's scenario, he was exposed during World War II, some to the remote viewing networks, so he understood what was at stake when he wanted to leave, and he had a blackmail document on many of the major movie, military generals, etc., 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 what girls and boys that they were with, how they were cheating, where they were taking money. He had an extensive blackmail list.
So he basically prepared for his departure.
Correct.
I mean, he basically said, okay, this is it, I'm out, I can't do this, and then gathered all of these files, and so that basically this would be his safety so that they couldn't kill him.
His dead man switch.
His dead man, yes, that's it, dead man switch.
You do anything to me that alters my sovereignty, this goes out onto every airwave that I can manipulate in any way, shape, or form.
So do you think that these beings knew about the Matrix and the beings that are involved in implementing it? I mean,
Well, in Elvis's scenario, he grew up through World War I and II. He understood that it was a beginning of a military state. So when he got exposed to military Hollywood is where he began to understand how far you could project power to. He saw some of the dark stuff that they thought that they did there. Didn't want to be a part of it until they drugged him to the point that he didn't realize he was consciously interacting with it, and stuck with those own horrible dreams about what was or wasn't, because it was just a haze of drugs where he was the center of ritual. And we see that when today's society in Hollywood, with all the different awards that they have and the way they put them up there as trophies and as ceremonial rituals, whether it's the Super Bowl or the Oscars.
So that's kind of where the forces of domination and control are being positioned now.
Correct.
They back themselves into a corner, and the only way out is, once you play your last chip,
you're done.
You're done. Yeah, there's eventually,
unless somebody loans you money.
Which that's of course part of the game of domination and control.
Exactly.
Okay, what about John Lennon? Now that I'm asking about people that we.
John Lennon learned how to transcend time while on music, while doing music. And it was the beginning of video recording, and he began having beings show up in the video recordings. And if he was allowed to live, he would have influenced the millions into revolution.
Well, yes, most assuredly.
There you go, and that's why he was taken out.
I heard that Yoko Ono was part of the Illuminati.
No.
Okay.
She's a free will individual that has been abused.
I like her myself. I mean, I've always felt that she's, she has.
There's a reason the two of them that they were soul family that went back to the Lemurian age. And they would have transmitted Lemurian singing technology.
Wow!
It upgraded people's soul codes and DNA just through singing.
Wow. And of course he has children too, Julian, and I think a couple of others, so it's not like the game is over for them.
Well,
unless
he was a special person.
Yes.
And chose to make his talent very special.
What about George Harrison?
He's a time war sufferer.
Really?
Time traveler many times over.
Oh.
Many times, super soldiers, program people in domination and control in the sexual abuse industry, they'll force people to watch a certain band or follow a certain band member, and that helps them when they're ripped out of one time stream and put into another, and these old guy bands are still around. They identify to them, they go to those concerts, and then there's people always watching those concerts that can bring them back and shepherd them back into the system.
Oh.
So it's stuff, when you're working with musicians, this is integrated into the system to lure back people, because it's easy to create an obsession for music that gives you a positive benefit.
Right.
And thus that lures you back into the loop.
Right. So I'm guessing that the Rolling Stones are part of that.
Well,
somehow part of that.
They are a part of it, but ironic thing about the Rolling Stones is they create a music that passes generations.
Right.
When you listen to the original recordings of Sympathy for the Devil, you only get what you need. It's a total vibration than the modern recorded ones that are remastered of the new systems. It doesn't have the same 60s power behind it. Because that was recorded during that time frame.
Oh, right. What about the Jimmy Savile scandal that broke not too terribly long ago?
Absolute proof that the sexual abuse ring runs to the highest levels of government and media.
Yes, it's global, and in fact,
it's been around a very, very
long time. And I hear that the Netherlands is a hotbed, a nest of,
all throughout
Queen Beatrix,
all throughout Europe. There are pockets of it. But that system of pockets of sexual child abuse and slavery has been there for thousands of years also.
So
there are entire communities, that's all that they do.
Right, and everything might look like
normal
tulips and roses and things, but
there's people locked in the basement.
Right.
And they do things like this. Some of these events are planned to determine how much the resistance of Free Earth is there and ready to react.
And to find out, how quickly, yes. And of course, all of the major...
and it allows them to test their data.
Right, so it could be no more unusual than a test balloon going up.
Correct.
Okay. And they do that on all the major media like Facebook and all the different social media sites. And that's all pretty much run by artificial intelligence?
And teams of remote influencers.
Okay, so Google and all the major...
Well, the actual people in Google, no, they're separate. These are the franchises that I spoke about in an earlier episode.
Right.
They have access to the raw data that is collected on us from all those social networking data mining sites.
Oh.
That information is then fed into an artificial intelligence that makes a massive computation and makes a predictive model for each individual and then the whole and total. And the remote influencers look at this data and process the data and then begin to target lineages of people through the internet who have an ability to reach far.
But some events that have been predicted as being in the future have to be there, but they have a certain amount of
wiggle space.
Right, to adjust and make modulation controls. Okay, that makes sense. And one of the 15 of the families, or one of the 15 beings, triggered those things?
Orchestrated it from the highest level with its puppetry ability.
Okay. Several of them may have been privy to it.
No, Aurora was one particular being, the one that's in charge of North America.
Oh, okay. So are there different sections that they're in charge of?
Yes, they've each got their own little
dominion. Okay, and then they coordinate all that information.
Not always,
but
they do
with reservations.
Yes.
Okay, I got you.
There basically was an agreement to coordinate basically up until the very end. 2011 to 2014. They would coordinate all the way until then.
So after 2014, the ability to coordinate, everybody's on their own?
Well, we're not in time anymore. We're not in disunity time. So it begins to dissolve their control.
Right.
Their control is
right.
based off of time. That's the fundamental axis.
Right, because of all the time wars and everything, and the time, and that all stopped.
If our belief of time changes, all their time is a microscopic piece of dust compared to the expansion.
Right. That's right. That's right.
It's a pinprick.
That's right. And that just dissolves everything. It changes the whole,
the whole paradigm.
Now, are they all at war with each other, pretty much?
Timeline war with each other.
Okay.
Manipulative war with each other. But at the same time, they're all looking at the light forces that are out there.
Oh, well, right.
They're surrounded.
Oh,
Each one is the Hitler in a bunker right now.
Ah, that's a good analogy. So we should see an acceleration of, technically...
the word acceleration has too many 3D matrix to reference to it. It always happens when it happens.
Okay.
Because the wavelength of total consciousness of Earth reaches the peak in the bell curve, and then it goes down again, and it peaks again, and then it goes down again, and it peaks again, and it happens on a peak.
Okay.
It doesn't ever happen on a down. It always happens on a peak.
Okay, and we're in a
peak.
Yeah, definitely. No question about the super full moon tonight, and then we started these interviews on the 21st, the solstice. The energy's definitely been, and on Mount Shasta on top of it. So,
to add a little more to what we were talking about, the predictive models think there's going to be 18 peaks this year.
Okay.
So there are 18 positions in which all of the individual factions have to make their moves. And many of their moves are going to be countered. So it's what moves win during those 18 peaks determines the total value of consciousness for that year.
Oh. Huh. Interesting.
Because each one is divisive or multiplicative of the consciousness. So if the forces of light win, they multiply consciousness. If the darkness wins, they deplete consciousness. The total vibration of all sentient life living right now here on Earth.
Okay. And according to what you're looking into from the Akashic Records, would you say that there's going to be an expansion of consciousness in general?
We've had 7 peaks so far.
7 peaks, okay.
So there's 11 more peaks to go during the end of the year. So that means there's 11 more attempts at fear porning versus consciousness expansion.
And then plus you have the random wild cards now that
which are people
up.
Standing up and claiming their sovereign will and acting upon it.
To learn more about Andrew's courses, including the Hacking the Hologram teaching series coming this October, go to andrewbartzis.com.
Each different bubble of reality is true.
A galactic historian is a person that looks at all the lines of dramatic karma.
Nudge, nudge. It's the Holy Grail. Improvise. Mysterious. It's counter psychic intelligence.
Why is DNA farming of this star cluster so important?
Because we do manifest our reality. We do create our reality.